Discovered my sister inherited the house behind my back. Mom said, "She deserves it. You were always the disappointment anyway." So I quietly stopped paying the bills. 3 weeks later, she texted, "Why is the power off? Fix it now." No, please. No apology. I simply retorted, "I, 32M, always thought family meant something." I was wrong. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was fixing a client's plumbing in downtown. Mom's voice was cold, matter of fact, like she was reading from a grocery list. She informed me that Grandma's house had been left to my sister in the will. The house I'd been maintaining for the past 3 years. The house where I'd spent countless weekends fixing leaky faucets, replacing broken tiles, and keeping the yard pristine. The house I'd assumed would be split between us. I stood there in a stranger's bathroom, wrench in hand, listening to her explain how the inheritance had been finalized weeks ago. When I asked why nobody told me, she said my sister deserved it because she'd visited Grandma more often. I reminded her that I'd been the one calling Grandma every Sunday, the one who drove her to doctor appointments, the one who rushed over whenever something broke. Mom's response hit like a sledgehammer. I was always the disappointment anyway, and my sister had a family to think about. The line went dead. I finished the job on autopilot, my hands working while my mind reeled. That evening, I drove to the house one last time. My spare key still worked. The place looked exactly as I'd left it after my last maintenance visit. Fresh paint in the hallway, new light fixtures in the kitchen, garden beds I'd planted just weeks before. My sister hadn't even bothered to change the locks. I walked through each room, remembering. The living room where I'd spent Christmas mornings as a kid. The kitchen where Grandma taught me to make her famous apple pie. The basement where I'd stored my tools and kept spare parts for repairs. 3 years of my life invested in keeping this place perfect. In the kitchen, I found the folder where I kept all the utility accounts. Electric, gas, water, internet, property insurance. Everything had been in my name since I started managing the property. My sister probably didn't even know which companies provided the services. I sat at Grandma's old dining table and made a series of phone calls. Each utility company was professional and understanding when I explained I was transferring responsibility for the accounts. They'd need the new account holder to call and set up service. Until then, everything would be disconnected within 7 to 10 business days. The insurance company was particularly helpful. They explained that once my policy was canceled, the homeowner would need to secure new coverage immediately or risk violations with their mortgage company. I scheduled the cancellation for the following week. I gathered my tools from the basement, my spare house key, and the folder containing 3 years' worth of maintenance receipts. The total was staggering. Over $15,000 I'd spent keeping their inheritance in perfect condition. For 3 weeks, I waited. My phone remained silent. No thank you calls for all those years of free labor. No questions about utility accounts. Nothing. Then the text arrived. "Why is the power off? Fix it now." Not a greeting. Not an explanation. Not even a please. Just a demand, like I was her personal maintenance staff. I stared at that message for a long time. 3 years of sacrifice reduced to an annoyed command. I thought about Grandma, who'd always taught me that family should take care of each other. I thought about all those weekends I could have spent with friends instead of fixing her future inheritance. I thought about Mom's words. "You were always the disappointment anyway." My response was simple. Not my house, not my problem. Contact the utility companies yourself. The phone started ringing immediately. I let it go to voicemail. Then came the angry texts, one after another. How dare I leave them without power? How irresponsible I was being. How I was sabotaging my own family. The irony wasn't lost on me. By evening, my sister had apparently discovered that all the utilities were in my name. Her next message was different, panicked instead of angry. She asked how to get everything transferred. I sent her a photo of the utility company contact list I'd compiled over the years, along with a note that she'd need to pay deposits for new service since she had no history with any of the providers. Mom called the next morning. She accused me of being petty and vindictive. I reminded her that I was just the disappointment, so surely my competent sister could handle basic homeownership responsibilities. Mom hung up on me. The calls and messages continued for days. Apparently, getting utilities reconnected wasn't as simple as my sister had assumed. The electric company wanted a deposit. The water department required an inspection before restoring service. The internet provider had a 2-week wait for installation. Each company also mentioned the outstanding final bills in my name that needed to be settled before new accounts could be established. Bills that totaled nearly $800. A week later, my sister showed up at my apartment. She looked exhausted, defeated. She explained that her family had been staying at a hotel because the house was unlivable without utilities. She asked if I could help get everything reconnected. I told her I'd be happy to help, for my standard consulting rate of $50 per hour, plus reimbursement for all the money I'd invested in maintaining her inheritance. She called me heartless and stormed out. That's when I received the most surprising call of all. Grandma's old neighbor contacted me, confused about why I was no longer maintaining the property. The yard was getting overgrown, and someone had mentioned seeing what looked like water damage around the foundation. I drove by the house that afternoon. My sister had clearly tried to turn the water back on herself. There was a soggy mess where the main valve had been improperly reconnected. The sprinkler system I'd carefully calibrated was flooding the foundation, and the timer box hung open, wires exposed to the elements. The lawn I'd spent 3 summers perfecting was turning brown in patches. The garden beds were overrun with weeds. One of the gutters I'd recently repaired was hanging loose again, probably damaged when my sister tried to access the roof to check the satellite dish. It would take thousands of dollars to fix the damage that had accumulated in just 2 weeks of neglect. Update 1. The situation escalated when my sister's husband called me directly. He was more diplomatic than the women in my family, acknowledging that I'd done a lot of work on the house over the years. He offered to pay me back for some of my expenses if I'd help them get the utilities sorted out. I appreciated his approach, but I'd made my decision. I explained that I was done being the family's unpaid handyman. If they wanted my help, they could hire me at market rates like any other contractor. He seemed to understand, which made his wife's reaction even more telling. According to him, my sister was furious that I wouldn't just fix everything out of family obligation. She apparently told him that I was being ridiculous, that family shouldn't charge family for help. The same sister who'd inherited a house worth over $200,000 was upset about paying for professional services. 2 days later, Mom called with a new strategy. She'd spoken to my aunt, and the family consensus was that I was being unreasonable. Everyone thought I should help my sister because that's what family does. I asked Mom if she'd also spoken to the family about how they'd excluded me from inheritance discussions, or how they'd failed to mention that I'd been maintaining someone else's property for 3 years. She got quiet. Then I asked her to calculate how much money I'd saved the family by providing free labor all those years. $50 per visit, weekly during summer, monthly during winter, plus emergency calls. It added up to thousands of dollars in saved contractor fees. Mom tried to argue that I'd volunteered to help, so I shouldn't expect compensation. I pointed out that my volunteering was based on the assumption that I was maintaining family property that I'd someday inherit. Now that I knew the truth, our arrangement needed to change. She accused me of holding the house hostage over money. I reminded her that it wasn't my house to hold hostage, a fact she'd made very clear. Update 2. 3 weeks after the utilities were disconnected, my sister finally hired professionals to get everything reconnected. The process took longer than expected because of the water damage she'd caused trying to fix things herself. The electric company required an inspection before restoring power, and the inspector found several code violations that needed to be addressed. Apparently, some of my DIY electrical work over the years hadn't been up to current standards. The house needed a $1,000 electrical upgrade before power could be restored. The water damage was worse than it had initially appeared. The foundation had sustained enough damage to require professional waterproofing. The hardwood floors in the basement were ruined and needed replacement. My sister called me in tears, asking if I knew about any of these issues. I explained that I'd been planning to address the electrical updates gradually and had been monitoring the foundation situation carefully. Regular maintenance had kept small problems from becoming big ones. She asked why I hadn't mentioned these issues when I handed over the house. I reminded her that nobody had actually handed anything over. I'd simply discovered that I'd been excluded from inheritance discussions and stopped providing free services. If she'd involved me in the transition, I would have gladly provided a comprehensive property report and maintenance schedule. Instead, she'd chosen to handle everything independently. The conversation ended with her asking if it was too late to work something out. She offered to pay me back for my documented expenses if I'd resume helping with the property. I told her I'd consider it, but first she needed to get current on all the professional repairs. I wasn't interested in patching problems that had been caused by neglect and DIY disasters. If she wanted to hire me going forward, she needed to start with a clean slate. She agreed, reluctantly. Update 3. It took my sister 6 weeks and nearly $12,000 to get the house back to the condition I'd left it in. The electrical work, water damage, foundation repairs, and utility deposits had added up quickly. During this time, I'd been getting updates from neighbors who knew me from my years maintaining the property. The house had become something of a neighborhood concern. Utilities trucks coming and going, contractors assessing damage, the yard looking increasingly neglected. One neighbor mentioned that my sister had asked him for advice about lawn care. When he'd suggested she hire the service I'd always used, she'd complained about the cost. He'd apparently told her that property maintenance was expensive, which was why my years of free labor had been such a valuable gift. That conversation seemed to be a turning point. My sister called and asked if we could meet to discuss a formal arrangement. She'd spoken to her husband, and they'd realized how much money my maintenance had been saving them. They wanted to hire me as their property manager, with a proper contract and regular payment. I agreed to meet, curious about what they'd propose. The conversation was different this time. She apologized for taking my work for granted and for the way the inheritance had been handled. She admitted that she'd assumed house maintenance was simpler than it actually was. Her offer was reasonable, a monthly retainer for routine maintenance, plus hourly rates for major projects. She'd also pay me back for half of my documented expenses from the previous 3 years. I told her I'd consider it, but I had conditions. First, all communication about the property needed to go through me directly. No more commands filtered through Mom. Second, she needed to acknowledge that our new arrangement was a business relationship, not a family favor. Third, if she ever again spoke to me the way she had in that first text message, our contract would be immediately terminated. She agreed to all my terms. As I was leaving, she asked why I'd been willing to work for free for so many years. I explained that I'd thought I was investing in my own future inheritance. When I discovered that wasn't the case, continuing to work for free would have been foolish. She nodded, seeming to finally understand the situation from my perspective. Final update. 6 months later, our business arrangement is working well. My sister pays promptly and treats me professionally. The house is back in excellent condition, and I'm earning fair compensation for my expertise. The family dynamics have shifted permanently, though. Mom and I have a polite but distant relationship now. She clearly disapproves of my transactional approach to family help, but she's stopped pressuring me to provide free labor. Other family members have been surprisingly supportive. My uncle hired me to assess his rental properties after hearing about my work. My cousin asked me to help design a maintenance schedule for her new home. Word has spread that I know what I'm doing, and I'm building a legitimate side business. The most interesting development came last month when Mom's water heater failed. She called my sister first, asking if I might be willing to help. My sister explained that I now charge for my services, and Mom would need to hire me like any other contractor. Mom hired a different plumber instead, paying twice what my services would have cost. I don't take satisfaction in her stubbornness, but I'm grateful for the clarity it provides. For years, I'd confused being useful with being valued. I'd assumed that my willingness to help meant my family respected my contributions. The inheritance situation forced me to confront the reality that I'd been taken for granted. My family valued my labor, but not my presence. They wanted my skills, but not my input. They expected my help, but not my partnership. Setting boundaries has been difficult, but it's also been liberating. I no longer wonder if I'm being appreciated. I'm being compensated. I no longer worry about being excluded from decisions. I'm not emotionally invested in outcomes that don't affect me. My sister and I have actually developed a better relationship since we clarified our roles. She respects my expertise because she's paying for it. I respect her honesty because she's acknowledging the value of my work. The house looks beautiful, by the way. Professional maintenance really makes a difference when it's properly compensated and professionally managed. Sometimes I drive by in the evenings and admire the perfectly trimmed lawn, the carefully maintained flower beds, the clean gutters, and fresh exterior paint. It's satisfying work when it's treated as such. Mom still calls it just a house, but my sister has learned better. She knows exactly what it takes to maintain that property, and she knows exactly what it costs when you don't. The disappointment, it turns out, was never about my capabilities. It was about their willingness to value what I brought to the family. Now that value is quantified and compensated, everyone knows exactly where they stand. It's not the family relationship I'd once imagined, but it's honest. And sometimes, honesty is worth more than sentiment. If you'd like to see more stories like this, a gentle tap on the subscribe button would mean the world to us.